Hello, my name is Margaret. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about inheritance or revenge. It's about my own grandchildren, Ella and Caleb, and the heartbreaking story of how they could no longer recognize the grandmother who once told them the most beautiful bedtime stories, me.
My son Michael was the apple of my eye, and when he married Ashley, it felt as if the whole world belonged to me. Not long after, they gave me Ella and then Caleb, and the quiet walls of this old house finally came alive again with the sound of children's laughter. Every weekend, they would visit me, and those evenings became our story time sessions. They'd curl up in my lap in their tiny pajamas, and I would tell them the most magical, unbelievable tales. Some passed down from my mother, others born from my own imagination. I'll never forget the wonder sparkling in their eyes, nor the way they would plead, "Tell it again, Grandma Maggie." In their little innocent worlds, the giants, fairies, and talking animals I spoke of felt so real that they refused to leave my side until sleep gently claimed them. But time has a cruel way of changing things. My son's business grew fast. They moved into a new and luxurious home, and as Ashley's once warm smile slowly froze into polite indifference, those nights filled with the scent of childhood stories faded, first to once a month and then to silence. As weeks turned into months, my longing for the sound of my grandchildren's voices became an unbearable weight. Each time I called, Michael's distant tone, "Mom, we've been busy. The kids have classes. Ashley's entertaining guests," built an invisible wall between us. They no longer wanted to hear my stories, nor did our warm embraces remain. I had become just the lonely, forgotten old woman on the other end of the line, searching for a tiny place in their busy, shining new lives. One holiday morning, clutching carefully wrapped gifts, I gathered the courage to show up unannounced. Ashley cracked the door open just enough to tell me the kids were still asleep and that she was getting ready for company. The sound of that door closing was harsher than any slap could ever be. From then on, I followed their lives only through Michael's posts on social media. Ella had started playing the violin, Caleb had won a medal in a sport I'd never even heard of, and I was the ghost missing from every photo, as if I had never existed at all. Last month, I heard they threw a huge party for Ella's 12th birthday, yet that glittering invitation never found its way to my mailbox. That's when I finally understood I was no longer part of their glamorous world. I was just the old, dusty woman who once told bedtime stories. Even though I had lost hope in my son and daughter-in-law, the ache of missing my grandchildren grew heavier in my chest with every passing day. One afternoon, driven by pure nostalgia and a faint, foolish hope that fate might let me see them again, I decided to visit the big plaza where I used to take Ella and Caleb for ice cream. As I moved through the weekend crowd, I suddenly froze. Right in front of the old cafe stood a family I knew by heart: Michael, Ashley, and my grandchildren, now taller, older, almost unrecognizable except for their laughter. In that instant, all my bitterness melted away. My knees trembled, but my heart overflowed with the same love I'd kept buried for years. I began walking toward them, desperate for just one hug, one breath of the scent that once lingered on bedtime stories and fairy tales. I was only a few steps away when I whispered, "Caleb, Ella, my darlings." Caleb, now nearly a young man, lifted his eyes from his phone and looked straight at me. But there was no spark of joy there, no trace of the stories I once told him. His gaze was cold, irritated, the look you give a stranger who's intruded on your world. Then I heard Ella's voice. "Mom, who's that woman?" Ashley's face turned pale as marble. "Come on, get inside. We don't know her," she snapped, pulling both my son and the children into the cafe before I could even take another breath. I stood frozen in the middle of the plaza, time collapsing around me. Ashley's venomous words, "We don't know her," echoed in my ears while dozens of strangers turned to stare with pity or discomfort. The cafe, the crowd, the city, all of it disappeared. There was only Ella's empty stare and Caleb's blank, almost disgusted expression, as if he were looking at a beggar. What pierced me the deepest, though, was that split-second glance from my son. Michael, my own boy, the child I had raised, the man I had loved more than life, looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger, then quickly turned away and followed his wife inside without hesitation. That was when I understood. Ashley hadn't just taken my grandchildren from me, she had taken my son too. When my legs finally gave out, I collapsed onto the nearest bench, gasping under the crushing weight pressing down on my heart. Those children, who once trailed behind me calling Grandma Maggie one more story, had forgotten me so completely that they couldn't even recognize me on the street. I don't remember how I found my way home, how I moved through the blur of faces and noise. Each step echoed with Ashley's cutting voice and my grandchildren's distant eyes replaying again and again in my mind until I felt hollow, half alive, half gone. When I entered my quiet house, the framed photos on the walls, those smiling, innocent faces frozen in time, no longer brought me joy. They only deepened the sorrow, because I finally understood. To them, I was no longer the sweet grandmother who told bedtime stories. I was just an old embarrassment my son wished to erase from his perfect life. The days after that night turned into an endless, monotonous spiral of pain. The deep silence inside the house no longer comforted me. It struck the walls like a cruel confirmation of the two words I had heard in the cafe. We don't know her. My mind replayed that moment over and over, trying to read the panic and resentment etched on Ashley's face. What had I done to her? What sin had I committed that made her so ashamed of me and Michael's new life in their glossy social circle, willing to go so far as to erase me from our children's memories? When I tried calling my son and the call simply ended, not dismissed, but cut off, I felt a bitter proof that the exclusion in the square wasn't a sudden lapse of judgment. It was a deliberate, calculated erasure. Doubt began to gnaw at me. Were those story time evenings, those warm breaths on my lap, those tiny voices begging Grandma Maggie again, merely tricks in my old mind? Or had money and status become such a powerful poison that they could make a grandmother's love vanish from her grandchildren's hearts? I realized with a cold clarity that I had become less than a memory to them. I was an old, unwanted object tossed aside because I didn't belong to their glitz and new worlds. The weight of that truth made breathing harder with every passing second.
I felt trapped in this house because the world outside kept reminding me of the family I had lost. When curious neighbors, the same kind ones who'd always known me and asked how the grandchildren were growing, came by, the little lies I told them, "They're so busy, they couldn't come," felt more shameful than the humiliation I'd felt in the square. The cinnamon cookies I used to bake because I couldn't imagine a house without them no longer filled the rooms with warmth. Opening the oven and preparing the trays stopped being a joy. It only emphasized the empty chairs and the silent rooms, turning a once loving ritual into a painful act. Sometimes, clinging to the last stubborn scrap of hope, I'd take the bus that ran into my son's wealthy neighborhood just so I could see them from a distance. But every time I neared the street where they lived, the fear of meeting Ashley's disdainful glance would overpower the ache in my mother's heart, and I'd turn back defeated before I could step inside. I'd sit with Michael's old photographs and his first report cards in my hands, and it would break me to think how the small boy who once looked at me with admiration had become this cold man hiding behind his wife's shadow and pretending not to know his mother. I hadn't raised him to be ungrateful. I raised him to love. That day, I understood something painful and final. My quiet waiting would not stir their conscience. They had already locked whatever conscience they had away in the corner of that luxurious house. If my grandchildren were ever to remember me, I would have to make them remember. And not by phone calls or timid knocks on their door. It had to be in a way they could not forget.
Instead of drowning in the grief of being rejected by my son and daughter-in-law, I felt something stir again inside me, a fragile, forgotten spark, when I found an old notebook in the chest at the end of my bed. Inside it was the very first draft of a fairy tale I had once written for my grandchildren. If they no longer wished to hear my voice, then I would find another way to open the door to that magical world they had forgotten. What had made me Grandma Maggie, what had rocked them to sleep and filled their dreams, wasn't my face or my money, but my words. So from that night on, I denied myself sleep and began to write down every story I had ever told them. The fairy who stole the moonlight, which Ella adored, and the adventures of the cowardly tiger, which once made Caleb laugh until he cried. I filled every page with trembling handwriting, recreating each tale in full, just as I had once whispered them in the dim glow of bedtime. Each line became a small journey back in time. Sometimes I got so lost in the words that I could almost feel Caleb's breath at my neck again, or hear Ella's impatient little voice asking, "Then what happened next?" Through tears and smiles, I poured my love into the ink. When it was finally done, the thick notebook lying before me wasn't just a collection of forgotten fairy tales. It was a testament, a last will written in stories. Every word I'd never been able to say in that cafe, every shard of heartbreak and unconditional love I still carried. But when I finished, I was struck with a cruel realization. Even if I mailed the notebook, Ashley would recognize my handwriting instantly. She'd tear it to shreds without a second thought. Those stories would never reach my grandchildren's ears. All my effort would end up in the trash bin of their perfect home. I needed another way, a way to buy
bypass her guard. That notebook sat on the table like a trapeze of my soul, and knowing it was useless as long as it stayed in my hands taught me something painful. This battle couldn't be won with love and memories alone. I needed an ally, a messenger who could slip inside my son's house, that dragon's den, without being noticed. My mind raced through the faces of old neighbors and distant relatives, searching for anyone still faintly connected to Ashley's glittering world, but I knew most of them had been cast aside, labeled as unsuitable for their new polished life, just like me. And then, just as despair began to settle in, I remembered Emily, the quiet daughter of my former neighbor. I'd once heard she occasionally helped Ashley with her deep cleans. She was a kind girl, always polite, and maybe, just maybe, her conscience hadn't yet been bought. The idea of entrusting my most precious stories to someone who was practically a stranger terrified me, yet it was the only spark of hope I had left. With trembling legs and a racing heart, I dragged myself to the bus stop that would take me to her neighborhood, feeling like a secret conspirator in my own family's tragedy. When I finally stood before her modest apartment door, my heart fluttered like a trapped bird inside my chest. If she refused me, or worse, told Ashley I had come, I wouldn't just lose my last chance, I would be sealing my final irreversible exile from my family's world. When my trembling finger pressed the chipped old doorbell and I heard hesitant footsteps approaching from inside, my heart pounded so violently I could hardly breathe. When Emily opened the door and saw me standing there, pale, weary, and shaking, the flash of shock and fear in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. And that house, my name had become something unspeakable. "Oh, Mrs. Maggie, please come in quick. If Mrs. Ashley's neighbors see you here, I'll be in trouble," she whispered, pulling me inside in a panic and seating me at the small table in her modest kitchen. I tried to explain that I hadn't come for money or help, only to reclaim a piece of a grandmother's stolen memories. When I placed the handwritten notebook, my years of love and effort, onto her table with trembling hands, I told her what I needed from her, to hide it in Ella and Caleb's bedroom, behind the old teddy bear I'd given them years ago. Emily's face went white. "You can't be serious, ma'am. In that house, even saying your name is forbidden. Mrs. Ashley would fire me. I'd lose everything," she said, stepping back, terrified. Seeing her fear almost broke me. I stood and took her cold hands in mine. "I know, my dear. I know I'm asking the impossible, but without those stories, my grandchildren will never know who they truly are. Please help me save their souls," I begged, my voice barely a whisper. For a long moment, she just stared, first at my tear-filled eyes, then at the innocent little notebook on the table. Finally, she took a deep breath and said quietly, "If I get caught, my life is over, Mrs. Maggie, but I can't live with this guilt either." And before I could even thank her, she slipped the notebook into her bag. In that tiny kitchen, at that very moment, a stranger I barely knew showed more courage and more conscience than my own son. When I left her apartment and returned home, it felt as if I had left my soul inside that notebook, now carried away in her bag. From that point on, everything was out of my hands. All I could do was wait, helpless, anxious, having entrusted my fate to the conscience of a kind but frightened girl. When Tuesday came, the day Emily was supposed to clean my son's house, time seemed to mock me by slowing to a crawl. Each tick of the clock replayed the possible disasters in my mind. Ashley's furious scream as she discovered the notebook, Emily's trembling voice trying to explain the sound of everything falling apart. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. I kept pacing through the house, imagining how Emily might have found a moment alone, how she might have slipped into the children's room, how close she might have come to getting caught. When evening fell and darkness filled the windows, and still no word from Emily, not even a whisper of "it's done" or "I was caught," the last ember of hope inside me froze into terror. Had she lost her job because of me? Or worse, had she panicked, thrown the notebook into a trash bin, and erased me from her life forever? That night, I stayed by the phone until morning, waiting for a call that never came. The silence was deafening, even louder than that day in the cafe when I heard, "We don't know her." It told me, more clearly than words ever could, that the secret path I had carved toward my grandchildren had been sealed shut, and that my stories would never find their way into that house.
The days after that Tuesday night bled into Wednesday and Thursday, and the stubborn, deafening silence of my phone proved one thing painfully clear. This was no mere delay. It was proof that poor innocent Emily had been sacrificed to the cruel rules of that house because of me, and that my last fragile hope had been snuffed out forever in those glossy hallways. I didn't even feel anger toward her. Asking a young woman to risk her livelihood to spy for me while hiding from Ashley's hawk-like eyes had always been the desperate fantasy of an old woman with no other options. Most likely, the moment she stepped over that threshold, she'd been crushed under the weight of it all. Still, driven by one last foolish curiosity, I called Emily's number over the weekend. The phone rang once and then went dead. Proof at last that she was too frightened to speak to me, and that Ashley's anger outweighed any love for the stories I had written. There was nothing left to fight for. As I closed the lid of the wooden chest slowly that day, I felt I was not only covering the handwritten notebook, but burying the warmth of those children in my arms, their innocent laughter, and the tiny possibility that they might one day call me Grandma again. From that moment, my life slid into a darker, deeper void than the humiliation in the plaza had ever made me feel. I had no phone calls to await, no secret deliveries to plan. I was simply an old woman left to wait inside these four walls, abandoned by living memories and awaiting a quiet, forgotten end. Weeks passed since Emily's frightened silence turned my last hope to ash. My days were no longer spent making plans or counting down rings. They were spent dissolving slowly within these walls under the weight of the shame from the plaza and the foreign looks of my grandchildren. Then, out of the blue, a single sharp ring broke that numbing routine. I jumped so violently that my heart nearly stopped. I had long since lost faith in human decency. I assumed any call was the harbinger of yet another disaster. When the screen lit with my son Michael's name, my head told me it wouldn't be good, but the foolish, hopeful part of a mother whispered that perhaps he'd regret it, that conscience might have cracked the ice around his heart, and my shaking hand reached for the receiver, but the voice that came through was cold and distant. "Mom, how dare you send that woman to my house?" he demanded. I felt my blood run cold. He didn't ask how I was. He told me that Emily had been caught,
that my nonsense notebook had been found by Ashley, that Emily had been humiliated and fired for stealing and spying, and that if I ever again disturbed their family in the slightest, he would cut me off completely. I listened to that threatened, chill tirade without breath. In that instant, the voice of my own son framed my love for my grandchildren as a crime, a kind of harassment.
After that final icy threat from my son, the sharp click of the phone hanging up, I remember holding the receiver to my ear for minutes that felt like hours. That mechanical sound wasn't just the end of a conversation. It was the sound of my own child severing the last thread that tied me to my family. It wasn't only my hope that had died. I had dragged poor, kind-hearted Emily down with me. Because of my foolish plan, that innocent girl had been branded a thief and a spy. Imagining her shame and fear haunted me, adding a crushing layer of guilt on top of my son's betrayal. To picture that notebook, the one I'd written through sleepless nights, the one that held every piece of my soul, ink torn apart in Ashley's mocking hands, its magical words scattered into a household trash bin. That pain cut deeper than losing my son himself. The word harassment, the one my son had spat out so coldly, kept echoing in my mind. So this was how they saw me now, not as a grandmother longing for her grandchildren, but as a danger to their perfect, glittering world. I wasn't forgotten anymore. I was condemned. With that phone call, the last fighter inside me died. There were no more plans, no secret messengers, no flickers of hope. I was now officially a stranger. And hearing that truth in my own son's voice froze me to my chair until dawn. After that day, marked forever by his cruel warning and betrayal, my life simply stopped. I had no strength left to blame myself for what had happened to Emily, nor anger to hurl at my son for his merciless words. I became an empty shell, watching time flow past me from the same old armchair. When the neighbors knocked, when the shopkeeper called out, "Mrs. Maggie, do you need anything?" their voices reached me like muffled echoes underwater. Because once a mother and a grandmother are branded as a threat by those she loves most, the concern of the rest of the world means nothing. The memories that used to wake me gently at night, the giggles, the bedtime stories, turned into torture. So one morning, with the last bit of strength I had, I took down the framed photos from beside my bed and turned them face down so their smiling faces would stop wounding me. Even the fairy tale books I'd once loved became unbearable to open. Every page, every once upon a time, was now a poisoned blade, reminding me not of innocence and wonder, but of how my stories had ruined Emily's life and ended up
torn apart in the trash bin. Months passed this way, and I eventually accepted the truth. My grandchildren who no longer knew me, my son who had threatened me, my daughter-in-law who had destroyed my legacy, they had all won. I no longer missed them. I no longer waited for anything. I simply existed in this house as the forgotten woman they left behind, waiting quietly for my story to end.
Nearly a whole year had passed since my son's last call, that final wound that had cut me off from my own blood. In the span of those 4 seasons, not only had the roses in my garden withered, but the last flicker of life within me had also dried up at the root. What remained was nothing but an aging body and a hollow house echoing with the sound of winter winds. I only went outside once a week, and only during the quietest hours, just to buy food enough to silence the ache in my stomach. I took back alleys to avoid the pitying eyes of old neighbors asking, "How are you, Mrs. Maggie?" And when I passed by parks, I always quickened my pace. The laughter of children had become knives twisting in my chest. My son's threat had done its job. I no longer said my grandchildren's names aloud. I no longer dusted the turned-down frames on my nightstand. I had accepted it. I was already dead to them, and this house had become my tomb, buried under the ghosts of my own memories. Then, on one of those gray, monotonous days, I reached into the mailbox to collect the usual bills and felt my hand brush something unfamiliar, a thick, elegant envelope with no return address and no trace of my own shaky handwriting. I froze. It wasn't from a bank, nor an invitation. It was something else entirely. It was as if someone had tossed a stone into the still grave my life had become. And as I turned the envelope over in my trembling hands, a spark I hadn't felt in a year, that dangerous, aching curiosity, began to stir inside me. The envelope felt heavy, almost hot, like a live ember. My fingers shook not from age, but from fear, the pure, childlike kind that comes from hope. One part of my mind whispered that it must be some final insult from Ashley, perhaps a legal notice, while another, foolish part, still dared to imagine a miracle. When I finally tore it open and saw that it wasn't a formal document at all, but a sheet of thick, textured drawing paper, my confusion deepened. It was too luxurious to belong to my simple world, clearly from theirs, yet I couldn't guess what message it carried. I unfolded it carefully. The childlike drawing before me made no sense at first. A large bed, a teddy bear by the headboard, and behind it, half hidden, a notebook. A small girl with a startled expression stood before it, as if she had just discovered something secret. The colors were faded, the lines uncertain, but the notebook's cover was unmistakable. My eyes drifted down to the bottom corner where a shaky line of childish handwriting read, "I found the fairy, Grandma Maggie, but don't tell Mom." My heart stopped. The fairy who stole the moonlight, that was the very first story in my lost notebook. That day, the day my son said she got caught, the day Ashley said I tore it up, the day Emily was fired, it had all been a lie. That brave, kind girl hadn't thrown the notebook away. She hadn't been caught. She had risked everything, and somehow she had delivered my stories. And for a whole year, my granddaughter had been reading them secretly, in silence, hiding from her mother, breathing life back into the forbidden fairy tales of her grandmother.
My granddaughter Ella's clumsy drawing and that trembling little note hit my heart, so long dead and crusted over, like a sudden flood filling a dry riverbed. I stood frozen at my kitchen table, holding that scrap of paper, because the great wall of lies my son had built with that cruel phone call collapsed the moment my granddaughter whispered her secret. In that instant, I thought of poor, good-hearted Emily, whom I had imagined caught and ruined, while I spent months consumed by guilt, believing she'd been labeled a thief and a spy. That brave girl had risked everything in that hellish house to protect my last bequest, a piece of my soul, slipped past Ashley's hawk-like eyes and carried out her mission. My son Michael and his wife Ashley, they hadn't just told me to stay away from their home. They'd planned deliberately and cruelly to cut me off forever, to smother my last hope, and severed the final thread that tied me to my grandchildren by inventing the lie that the notebook was found and Emily was fired. Ella, my clever, story-loving girl. Despite the bright, fake world around her, despite her mother's strict bans and her father's cowardly silence, she had found that notebook. For a whole year she read those stories in secret and found a way, dangerous and brilliant, to tell me, "Grandma Maggie, I haven't forgotten you. I'm still here." The heavy defeat that had weighed on me for a year, the resignation and the cold silence, melted in the warm colors of that drawing. I looked at the upside-down photos beside my bed and at my dusty storybooks and realized this war was far from over. With my granddaughter's secret message and my son's vile lie, something new had begun. Her hidden message pulled me up from the bottomless pit of grief I'd been living in. I tucked that paper into the safest place I could think of, the old wooden chest, and knew with a clarity that surprised me that I must fight not merely to survive, but to hold the secret thread that brave little girl had offered me. My sons and daughter-in-law's disgusting lie that Emily had been fired and the notebook destroyed no longer simply hurt me. It fanned the smoldering embers inside me into a dangerous flame. I understood then that they hadn't only kept me from my grandchildren, they had hoped I would shrivel and disappear in silence. Ella's warning, "Don't let Mom see," echoed in my head. It showed me how terrified my granddaughter was in that house, forced to hide her love as if it were a crime. Any reply I sent directly could burn her. I couldn't risk sending anything that would expose her. But then I examined the drawing more closely, especially the crooked little sketch of a computer screen, and an entirely different idea came to me. Maybe I didn't need a messenger like Emily anymore, nor did I need to slip back into that house. Perhaps I should send my stories somewhere the whole world could see them, not just behind those pristine walls. If Ella was clever enough to find the forbidden notebook and brave enough to mail that envelope, then the news stories I would send as Grandma Maggie might be found in the very center of the modern, trusted world her mother prized, a place Ashley would never imagine. My new plan would not be to hide. It would be to be seen by everyone.
I could never reclaim that stolen year, the one my son's threatening call had ripped away. But my granddaughter's secret message had given me something even stronger. courage. That day, for the first time in my life, I stepped into an internet cafe. The room hummed with the buzz of old computers, the click of keys, the chatter of teenagers. Among them sat a kind young man named Kevin, who listened as I told him everything: the betrayal, the forbidden stories, the hidden drawing. My trembling voice carried years of pain. When I finished, Kevin looked at me and said, "Mrs. Maggie, there's a way to get your stories into that house, and their parents will never even know." Then he turned the bright screen toward me. His plan was so simple, so brilliant, that Ashley's sharp, prideful mind would never see it coming. While she still pictured me as the helpless old woman on the worn-out couch, I would slip into her world, right through the tablets her children held every day, with my voice, my words, my stories. That day, in that tiny, stuffy room, I leaned toward the cold microphone and whispered, "Once upon a time." But this time, my voice wasn't just for Ella and Caleb. It was also for my lying son and his heartless wife, for their deaf consciences and frozen hearts. When Kevin uploaded the first story to something he called YouTube, I realized I was no longer a sorrowful victim. I was a captain, casting a bottle into the vast digital ocean, a bottle carrying the secret message of my soul toward 2 small islands across the sea. I knew my clever grandchildren would find it. The days that followed were filled with a strange, electric tension. Each morning I went back to Kevin's small shop, sat before the glowing screen and stared at the number next to views. It stayed at 0 for days. My old fears returned, the fear that nothing I did could ever change my fate. Then, on the 4th evening, the 0 turned to a 1, then to a 5, and beneath the video appeared a comment. Not from Ella or Caleb, but from a child I'd never met. It felt like listening to my own grandma. "Please make more." That single message changed everything. Dozens more followed, then hundreds. My forbidden tales, my voice heavy with loss and love, had broken through not just the walls of that luxurious house, but into other homes, other lonely hearts I'd never known. Out of my sorrow, something healing had begun to bloom. And just as I stopped wondering whether my grandchildren would ever find the channel, I saw it, buried among hundreds of comments beneath the Cowardly Tiger story. No profile picture, no name, just one quiet line. "The tiger isn't scared anymore, and he found the fairy too. What's the next story, Grandma Maggie?" Right there in that noisy internet cafe, I knew I had won. My son and daughter-in-law could lock me out, close their doors and bury me in lies, but they could never stop those 2 small hearts from finding me in the wide ocean of the digital world. And from that day on, I wasn't just Ella and Caleb's grandmother. I became Grandma Maggie to hundreds of children whose names I didn't even know. Each of them listening somewhere to a voice that had finally found its way home.